everybody else who's on here, I already said this to Mark and Ashley, but I I created, I mean, this is Larry's class, and I just have been getting people to come and join it. He is the expert in this, and I am here to learn just as much as the rest of you are about his all of the knowledge that he has in this. Because Larry, you've been in the lending industry for what, 20 years?
Yeah, you're flattering me. This is my 29th year.
Oh,
22, so
holy crap!
yeah, yeah.
You're looking good for your age.
He's a professional.
Except for my birthday's tomorrow, so I'm going to be a year older tomorrow, right?
Oh my gosh! Happy birthday!
Thank you. Yeah.
Are you guys doing anything fun?
Should I send you my Venmo request? Or are you good for my birthday? No.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, everyone Venmo him a drink.
You know me. Exactly. I'm easy. You know me. It's like, yeah. So.
And then how long have you been? Because you've also been investing in real estate for years.
Yeah. So I started that back in. So I got in the business in 1992, and I bought my first house in 1993.
There you go.
So are we going to start, because that's kind of part of my story?
Yeah, I mean, we've got 10 people on 603. As a handful of people said that they wouldn't be able to make it even though they registered. So I'll just record all of this. Let me see. Are we recording?
That's cool. I mean, yeah.
Take it away.
Yeah. And yeah, so hey, nice to meet everybody. This will be just real casual, and really it's about just kind of telling my story and just how I became so passionate in real estate. And so like we were talking, it really started with my parents. So my dad was a TV technician back in the 70s and 80s, and I'm a native of Portland. I grew up in North Portland. My parents still live in North Portland. And so my dad, when he moved back, from being in the service, he got a job as a TV repairman. So I'm probably a little bit older than most you guys on this call, but I mean, if you watch Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Spicoli's dad was a TV repairman, and he had an ultimate set of tools, and he can fix anything. That was my dad. I mean, AKA, I think it's kind of a spin-off of MacGyver. But so that's what my dad did. My mom was a hairdresser. I mean, she was a hairdresser for 18 years, and she ended up hating that career later in life. But what I saw was my parents went to a Carlton Sheet seminar. Again, I'm dating myself, but back in the 70s and 80s, there were only like 5 channels on TV. And so he was promoting, no money down to buy, properties. And basically it was a flip scenario. So you go and fix it up and you sell. And so my dad, working 40, 50 hours a week as a TV technician, said, hey, well, I'm going to try the same thing. Went to a seminar, and then he bought his first property in North Portland. I want to say he bought the property for about, I can tell you this is probably about 1983, 84, because I was about 13, 14 years old. And he bought this property for about $16,000, $17,000. And I can tell you that house was a 3-bed, 2-bath, ranch style. Very lot of, deferred maintenance. I mean, the grass was as tall as me at the time. I mean, just, it needed a lot of work. He's very handy. So I would go over there on weekends and, mow the lawn, weed eater, my neighborhood buddy of mine and all that, clean the place up, and then he'd renovate it, and then he'd sell it, and then he'd make like maybe, I don't know, $3,000-4,000, which doesn't sound like that much in today's world, but back then the ratio on that was a lot. But so he did about 2 or 3 of these, and then all of a sudden he got an opportunity to buy the business, and he bought the business, and he put it in real estate. Well, that was my first exposure. I'm like, okay, good, this is kind of cool. And then I just happened, I went to PCC in Portland State. I became, got my degree in finance law, and 2 of my really good buddies growing up got in the lending business. They're a year older than me, and said, hey, you'd be good at this. And so I got into it in 92 and never looked back. But what I learned from that is that the side of, or the exposure of seeing my dad do this, and then the side of lending has really just opened my eyes on the potential, the opportunity, and there's just nothing else that I can kind of equate it to that will give us, consumers an opportunity to build wealth, when we don't own like a business, right? Because really there's only a couple ways to build wealth. You either own a business, you build it up, you sell for a lot of money, and or real estate. And I now have met a lot smarter people than me that were business owners, heavy in real estate. They obviously want to stay diversified. And so it's one of those platforms and mechanisms that allows us to kind of really, take advantage of an opportunity, because I know nothing about Bitcoin, Dogecoin, or whatever. I just, that's not my lane. I'm not a day trader, but I do know one thing that has been sustainable, through my whole lifetime thus far, and that's real estate. So when I got out of college and I got my first job, my first job out of college in London was $19,000 a year, and my parents were like, "Hey, so you need to go buy a house." I'm like, "Oh crap! I've been living at home and I'm not ready to move out." And so they said, "No, it's time to move out." So, and I'm the youngest of 5 kids, so they kind of pushed me out, but they helped me get that first house. I bought this house through an FHA loan with 3.5% down. The house, we looked at probably 5 or 6 of them. They're about $34,000 for these houses in 1993. And I was like, "Gosh, I don't have 3.5% down of that." And they're like, "Well, we're going to help you because you're allowed to as under that program." And that's never changed, still the same today. But that one house in 1993 that I purchased, year after year, it just continued to appreciate in value. And then I saw what it did. And then again, being in the business, I'm like, "Well, wow, I can actually, now I have what we call equity." And so I was able to refinance that house for a lower rate, because when I bought the house in 1993, FHA rates were close to 9%. And so rates continued to go down. And then I'm like, "Okay, well, this is, makes financial sense." So I did that. But when I refinanced it, I got cash out. And then when I got the cash out, then I took that and I bought another house. And so now I stayed in the house and I bought an investment property, which I'll get to. It's totally different to do that. A little harder in this climate, but that's what I did. So pretty soon I started that one little house. They continued to grow in equity, and I probably refinanced that house since I owned it. I bought it in '93. I sold it in 2016 or 15, and I probably refinanced that house 3 times with the purpose of getting cash to go buy more properties, right? And so that's kind of the whole premise of when I realized what it has done for me personally to this day. That's why I get very excited about talking about real estate, and because again, there are not many platforms out there that we have access to that can really help us build net worth, right? And so the way that we can really take advantage of that today is, I don't tell people to go out and buy investment properties in this unless they have an abundance of cash, which a lot of us do not have, right? So the kind of the program or the model of this is, first and foremost, you got to buy the first house, right? So just get the first house. And it's not your dream house. It's not your first house. It's not your last house. We get that. But you got to get that first house, because once you get the first house, it will continue to appreciate in value. And then therein lies starts building your net worth to give you future opportunities. Okay. So unlike what I did, because I held that property for some time, it's and I'm dealing with appreciation factors back in the 90s, 2000s, even during the recession, which we saw, homes depreciate versus appreciate. But those homes today are worth way more than what they were pre-recession. 2006 was a very crazy year. Kind of reminds us a little bit of, maybe last year, but even last year, 2020, 2021, what values are doing or what prices are doing, or the ability to get a buyer in a house is we've never seen. It's unprecedented, and it's just tough. But we're having some success getting clients in contract. But the piece is making sure that we can actually go in and help a buyer get that first house, and let the appreciation start, doing its job. Because, I'll use a 5% appreciation factor historically. Terry, what have we seen in appreciation factors, I would say, in the last 24 months?
Oh my God. 10%?
Exactly. We're seeing double digit stuff, you guys. I never tell people to rely on that. Just use a 5% appreciation factor. If you look at historical, you'll be just fine when it comes to kind of looking at models and pro formas.
You're saying 5% appreciation per year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you buy a house for, I'll use a low number, which is hard to do in our market, but just call 300,000, right? So that's 300,000, right? And it's going to appreciate at 5% every year. right? With us doing nothing to the property, that's 15,000 a year that goes towards our net worth, right? And that makes sense, you guys, right? So if you want to get, again, use like what Terry just mentioned, and she is absolutely correct. 10%, now it's 30,000 a year. But remember, you guys, this is year after year after year after year. And knowing what we went through with the Great Recession that hit us in 2008, when we saw values that were doing this, and then all of a sudden they went like this, and then they free fell, I will say Portland actually weathered that storm so much better than other, I would say, counties in Oregon. The Northwest really had we saw depreciation, but we didn't see as much as we saw in the rest of the country. Deschutes County, Bend, Oregon, Central Oregon, right? So just say, you guys know, it's the first to go up in value, it's always the first to go down. And we've seen that historically. But what's changed about that market now is that before it was all second home vacation stuff. It's not anymore. Now you're getting people buying and living there and loving the climate. And so we probably won't ever see that again where we're going to, it'll be the first to go down because now they have the infrastructure, the fundamentals are there and all that. But I talk about the depreciation because we can't ignore it because, it's, even though I'm pro real estate, you just also have to be aware that home values could go down. They're not projected to, right? Especially with what we're dealing with today, and simply because way more buyers in the market than we have supply. So when the recession hit, all builders went on the sidelines. They couldn't get loans to build. They knew that they couldn't, what we call absorption. They couldn't, get buyers to purchase these properties. So, they sat on the sideline for 5, 6, 7 years. And then guess what? You have a demographic that came into play that came of age, right? And I will say it's the millennials, right? So 90 million to 100 million strong. Now all of a sudden they're coming out of college. They're making more money than what we were, at that time out of college. My daughter's one of them. And then you saw that we had more what we call household forms, right, or formations. And so that definition is basically Americans that they're that demographic that says yes, we're eligible to buy a house, and B, we want to. So there were more households formed over the last 7, 8 years than we saw even pre-recession. And so the problem we're having now is that you have all these buyers in the market, but we don't have enough supply because the builders sat on the sideline. And the builders can't keep up right now, right? It's taking, and then you can combine it with COVID. Now we have other issues where supply chain issues, people unemployed, and so we're now coming out of that. But it doesn't matter. We thought COVID was going to slow the real estate market down, and Terry did it.
No,
it's crazy. We thought we were waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it never dropped. And so I talk about this because we went through a worldwide, we'll call it a pandemic. That's the only way I can know how to describe it, but that had a massive economic impact on us, much like the Great Recession. I was just fortunate enough that I was at a certain age when I went through the Great Recession that all our properties were performing because I had tenants in there, and I wasn't out there sitting on a bunch of properties that are vacation houses that I can rent. But I have a lot of friends and buddies and all that came out, they got hit pretty hard by that. So the difference now is people can say, well, look, we're going to have a diversity in the market and so forth, but COVID hit, which nobody was prepared for, and the real estate market continued to thrive. And so the projections are it's only going to continue to thrive because of the loss of supply and demand, right? So that's kind of the basis of why real estate is still an amazing investment, right? We still need somewhere to live. We still get write-offs. Why would we continue to pay rent at X? And I'm a landlord. I'm speaking specifically. I have tenants that pay, and they benefit me because they're paying my mortgage, right? So this is where we need to flip the switch and go, okay, we're the script and go, hey, we should be buying a house and paying the same rent. So the biggest barrier to entry on a house is what? The down payment, right? It's not usually the monthly payment, right? So $1,800 a month, you can afford $2,000, or you can get a roommate and all this and that. So there's all these things that we can do, right? That we analyze and really kind of make things pencil. So, but the model, right, is got to buy that first house. So if I have to give you at least a loan amount here that's kind of important. So there's what we call a conforming loan amount. So this is 548,250. So that's important to know because as long as the loan amount is at that level or below after the down payment, then if you're a first time buyer, you can get in with little as 3% down. Okay. So if you're gonna buy a house for 500,000, you need 15,000 to put down minimum, right, to qualify. Okay. Based on credit scores, if for higher credit scores, and this is my job, if I know that you're going to be, you have good high credit scores and so forth, we'll put you in a conventional loan, 3% down, and the rate will be really. I can tell you that rate today is right about 3% for a 30-year fixed. The cost of mortgage insurance is really inexpensive, and so really at that point, it's all about, hey, do you have the cash to work with, and does it fit within your payment budget? If it's a little bit lower credit score, say mid 600s, then I'll probably recommend we go an FHA loan. That requires 3.5% down, which is that loan that I did my first year in 1993. Great program. Rates are better on that program. The cost of mortgage insurance is a little bit more on that just by virtue of an FHA loan. But still, as long as the payment fits within your budget, it's still a great option. Okay. And then the plan is, when you get that first house, you're going to live there for, a year, 2 years, whatever. And then at some point, you're going to decide whether it's you meet your significant other, you're expanding your family, we need a bigger house, whatever the reason is, or maybe you're just listening to this call and going, yeah, I really want to, build a portfolio of real estate. Then at some point, your next option should be to purchase the next primary residence, right? And so you can continue to do that as a primary residence and still deal with little down. But what I look at is before you do that, we have a conversation and we're going to look, okay, great. Here's a cool part. You put 3% down when you bought this thing 3 years ago. You have enough equity now to where you can remove the mortgage insurance. Okay. Or like what I've been doing with a lot of clients 3 years ago, the rates were higher. So we're now refinancing them out of that or refinancing their current residence, getting cash, removing mortgage insurance, lowering the rate. Now there is a little timing issue here because when we do that, that's because you're saying that you're still living in the home. And so, we'll do that. And then if the plan is for the cash to go buy another primary, then we need to wait about 6 months after we do that to not draw scrutiny because the timing of that is, well, wait a minute, you just refinanced as a primary. And now you're saying that you're taking the cash to go buy another house 30 days later. They're not going to let you do that, So these are kind of the intricacies of, when it comes to financing. But if you can kind of be patient on that component, then there's an opportunity to continue to get that next house with very little down. Okay. And so I have clients that are just, and I used to do, I do this class actually in person before COVID. And I have probably 9 or 10 clients that are, they're just to a T. They've done, it's been kind of fun. And so I've got one where he's a financial advisor and now he's on his, so yeah, he's got 2 now. We're working on the third right now. And this is in about a 4-year, 5-year span, and with COVID, what's kind of changed things a little bit is because the work from home scenario. So, he's now looking to buy a new primary residence out on the coast. He's a big time surfer. Not sure why he's a surfer here in Oregon because last time I checked, it's really cold water, but he's just a fanatic about it. But now he's looking to go ahead and say, and he can work from home, obviously being a financial advisor. So there's that's kind of helped our cause because normally they'd say, well, wait a minute, you're going to the coast to live, but yet your primary is here in Lake Oswego. Well, and he's stepping up. The price of that new house is higher than what the value of his current house in Lake Oswego is. But he's going to convert that house in Lake Oswego to a rental, So that's kind of one of the models that we look at. Another piece is second home versus investment. So people are like, well, hey, I've got some money to buy an investment property. Well, here's the issue with investment properties. And these are properties you're going to purchase in order to, right away have a tenant in it. And you need to use that income to offset some of the mortgage payment to qualify. So the rates are higher on investment properties. The down payment requirement is higher. So again, keeping, in respect to the conforming loan limit of 548,250 after the down, you can get in with as little as 15% down on an investment property purchase. But what I don't like about that, the rate's really high and the cost of mortgage insurance is high. So then the next option would be 20% down. What's that?
What's the rate with an investment property?
At 15% down, it's probably 5.3 today.
5.3.
Yeah. So then and then the next tier down is 20%. So down payments are in, with exception of that 3%, 5%, the 3% I mentioned earlier. After that, it's 5% increments on down payments. So an investment property, 15% down is, like I said, 5.3. You do 20% down, you're probably at 4.3. If you do 25%, which is a sweet spot investment, you're at like 3.3, right? And it's real important that we get that payment down, right, on investment properties, because we all want cash flow, right? So the tenant or tenants are going to pay X, and then we want to make sure we have cash flow on that thing, right? So that's why the investment properties are, if that's all the only option we have, then that's all we have, right? The other option that I like better is what I call the second home option, right? So a lot of people don't know this, but you can buy a second home without having a current home. Does that make sense? So you can be renting. What's that?
Well, why would you do that?
Because the costs of the rates are way lower on second homes versus investment. You can get in as little as 10% down on it, and then the cost of mortgage insurance is way less versus investment. Okay, so I'll give you an example. You could be living here today. I mean, I would not recommend a second home purchase if you don't have a primary first. Okay?
Yeah,
so
why would you? Right. Okay.
But I had a client that was living in the Bay Area, and he's like, hey, I just sold my house, I'm renting right now, but I need to parlay some of this money into, property up in somewhere. And I heard, we should do it up in Portland. And pre-COVID, of course, protests and all that stuff, of course, but still, he's fine. He ended up buying in Aloha. But he goes, hey, so how much do I need down for an investment property? Because he's going to rent it, And I said, well, look, we should do this as a second home because we can get a much better interest rate. And he put only 10% down, keep your cash. And then he's like, well, gosh, how do I do that? So I explained it. And so we closed the loan and we're fine, right? So that's why we would do a second home versus investment, because second home, 10% down, mortgage rates are way better, and the cost of the mortgage insurance is a lot less. Okay.
And
now,
Larry, this is the only difference between those two things, you declaring your intention, differentiating between that?
Great question, Ashley. Yeah, so pros and cons. So we know the pros of second home, much better terms, less down, right? All day. The caveat is we cannot use any projected rents to qualify. Whereas on an investment property, if you're going to go buy a property and let's say the new payment's going to be $2,000 a month and you can rent it for $2,800, right? I can use 75% of the $2,800 to help go towards that monthly payment. So it's additional income to qualify. Okay. So that's the big difference between the two. The second home, you have to qualify for the full payment. Okay.
You can have people, you can rent out the second home and it's not like going against because the primary residence, you can't rent it out. That's fraud or whatever.
Jumping ahead, Stephanie, but
sorry.
No, but that's it. So at the time we purchase a second home, because you have to qualify for the payment, we're not saying that you're going to rent it, right? But they know that, they know you're going to obviously rent it. And so a second home, you're actually allowed to rent it, okay? So here's where you reflect on tax returns. When you have rental properties or a second home that you rent, so let's say I have a place at the coast, and I'm going to short-term rent that thing, and I don't know, it's rented for 80 days a year. Well, you reflect that on what we call your Schedule E of your tax returns. Okay, so that's where that appears. So on there, it says number of days rented, because that's what you're going to tell your CPA or tax preparer. And then as long as that number of days is under the minimum, then that's still okay. I mean, and I have to rephrase this, because once you purchase the house, the second home, you can do whatever you want with it for rent. I mean, you can rent it every single day and it's fine, okay? The only reason I bring up the fact that second homes are still allowed to have some rental income on it and still be deemed a second home is in the event I'm trying to do another loan on that for a refinance, right? To lower the rate or get cash. So I'll give you an example. I had a client where he has this little condo in Monroe, Washington, and you know, he's like, hey, I rent it. I'm like, oh shoot, you know, so sounds like to me, because there was a rule during the recession that if you rent it, if you rent it for, you know, one day, it's now a rental property and the rates are higher on a refinance. Well, that changed. And so he's like, no, it's like, you know, I said, give me your tax return. So sure enough, I got the tax returns. He only rented it for like 60 days. And I think the rule is, you know, 50%. So, you know, 180 days a year or less. And so, yeah, so the beauty is we were still able to treat it as a second home, give him the low rate, and it was a win-win. So yeah, so to your question, Stephanie, once you close, you can do whatever you want with it. Okay? Yeah.
So I got a question on that.
Yeah.
Like if you purchase your second home, like don't you technically have to live in it, or
See, that's
mortgage fraud if you don't?
You're not going to occupy it.
You don't have to occupy it.
No, that's why a second home is nice. Right, vacation home.
That's interesting. I have other friends who are agents and both have bought second homes, but like talking to the lender and everything, they like is basically it's gonna be your primary residence, the second home, not the initial one that you already bought.
Well, no, so right, but did you hear yourself for a second? Because you said primary residence. So primary residence and second home are different, right? So
right. So is that second home you purchase has to be your primary residence?
No,
it doesn't.
If you're
you
buying
can still get that lower rate on it though?
Yeah, if you're buying a second home, it's a second home. So I'll use the example, like my primary residence is here in Tigard. I can go buy a house on the coast, Central Oregon, Hood River, and I can buy it as Arizona. I can go buy it as a second home. I don't have to occupy it. By definition,
so
by definition of it being a second home.
But then the bank knows you have two primary residents then, right?
But it's not another primary residence. It's a second home.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So here's how it works. You have your primary residence, you have a second home, you have an investment property. That's it. Right?
Then are you saying that these friends, did they buy them not as a second home, like the term the second home, but it is actually their second home, but they're purchasing it as a primary residence to get that interest rate and down payment?
Right, exactly.
Right. So they were calling it an actual second home in terms of lending.
No, they're calling it their primary to get that lower interest rate.
Yeah, well that's okay, then that's a primary residence. That's not a second home. I think
okay.
Yeah.
So there's two differences there then. Okay.
Second home is like vacation home versus it is the second home that you've purchased.
Yeah.
Okay. We're talking about
different like in numeric terms, right? Home number 2.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So Larry, to Vince's question, how do you jump from being a primary residence and then turning that into a rental property and then getting the same terms on your next primary residence, which would be the second home you've purchased?
Correct. Yeah. So the critical piece on that, on the next, the next house, if at all possible, you can stay conventional. That's so much easier, and the terms are way more favorable. Okay. And again, you guys, it's after the down payment. That loan amount is 540, 250 or less. That is a conventional loan, a conforming loan. Okay. So yeah. So what we do is, and maybe my example of five, I mean, we know the market's crazy, but let's just use, let's say you bought the first place for 400 grand, maybe 300, 350, it's a condo, town, whatever, right? And then you're there for a year. And now you decide, you know what, I'm looking to go get my next house. Well, so then we call the existing home a departing residence because you're no longer going to live there. So I'm going to want to know, what's your plan? Are you going to sell or keep? Well, hey, I'd love to keep it. Excuse me, but do I qualify? Right? So then we're going to look at all kinds, first thing we look at, can your qualifying income support the existing payment plus your other debt obligations and then the new payment, right? If it does, that's easy. Then we don't have to mess with any additional requirements or conditions on the existing home, okay? If it doesn't, then what we have to do is, then we know that we're going to put a tenant in there. This is where it gets a little tricky for timing because the new rule now is this, and this new rule's been around for about 7-8 years, but they now want to see that you have a signed lease agreement or intent to lease with a proof that you collected a deposit of the tenant coming in. Okay. If you do that, and when you do that, then we get to use 75% of the lease of the lease payment, right? And or what the the lesser of the two, and or what the appraiser determines what the market rent is for that property. Okay. So, I mean, to give an example, if your payment is $1,800 a month, you feel like you can rent it for 200 or 2,000 a month. We're going to take the 2,000 times 75%, subtract out your 1,800. Now that shows a net loss per month of $300. That's better than us hitting you for the full payment of the 1,800, right? So it helps our cause, but you have to meet those two requirements, like a signed lease and or intent to lease, and proof of deposit is collected.
But then you're saying that will show that money as basically income to you to help you qualify for this next home.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah. And then that helps our cause in the event that the borrower does not, their qualifying income isn't high enough to be able to absorb, right, both mortgage payments, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then you can go in and go buy the new property if it's, conforming loan, conventional loan, with as little as 5% down on the next house.
So that's for going from a primary residence to your next property, right? Or your next from primary to primary.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
So that's how okay. So how long do you have to stay at that primary residence in order to move on to the next primary?
Yeah. So there's nothing really written in the notes, but we just kind of coach our client, probably about a minimum a year. Unless there's an extenuating circumstance where you get a job relocation or whatever, and that's fine. Again, what we're trying to do is just avoid scrutiny or questions on, hey, you just bought this primary residence, and now 2 months later, you're now saying you're going to go buy another primary. They're not going to let you do that, right? So you kind of need just time,
Okay.
Another question with that. So if you're looking to use the equity from your first house that you bought to help put a down payment on the next primary, how does that affect your loan with the existing house?
Yeah. So I don't know if you might not have been on yet, Ben, but yeah, great question. That's a timing element there too, right? Because you're going to refinance it while you're living there as a primary to get the best rate and terms. But then what you can't do is take that money and go, hey, I'm using the money to go buy another primary, right? Unless you're going to sell the property. But I think you're saying if you're going to keep the property, right? The one you just refinanced.
Well, yeah. I mean, so going back to your example, let's say I bought a house for 350, it's worth 500 now, and I wanted to use 100 grand of that equity to put into the next house.
Yeah, but you're going to keep that house.
I'm going to keep the house.
Yeah, so there's a timing component there. So you want to refinance as soon as possible, right? And then just kind of, maybe 3, 4, 5 months goes by, and then that's when you're going to start really getting engaged to purchase the new house.
Okay.
Because what you can't have is, hey, 2 primary resident loans in a short period of time. And I had a client that did this, so I didn't do the refinance, but he refinanced the property October, I think it was 2018 or 19, no, 2018. And then he got referred to me by an agent over in Vancouver. And so then we were going through our analysis, and so he had the down payment, and we saw when when the loan started, it shows the start date on the credit report. And then when we went through the pre-approval, we were just like, okay, well, we got to get this checked on. And then so there's what they call it's called a MERS. That's an acronym for Mortgage Electronic Reporting System. And basically anybody that has a home loan, it kind of pulls up what, the activity or that loan, and it specifies, what kind of loan it was. Well, it popped up and said, hey, this guy just did a primary resident deal. He got cash out. Now he wants to go buy another primary. So I told him, I go, look, and he had talked to another lender too, and they thought he was okay, but for some reason he didn't go that route. But I just said, look, I mean, I think, here's where we're at. And yeah, he's putting a tenant in there. And so the way that I said, it's one or the other. Either you have to buy this new house as an investment, or we're going to have to refinance that one, And so we did the math on it. It made more sense for him to buy the new house as a primary because he's taking on more debt as a larger loan versus the other one. And so we just end up refinancing them simultaneously. So we got that done. That was probably one of the only times that's really come up, but just knowing that, the way that they can track things today, it's all about intent. And that's why just time, since you did a transaction really helps, you know. If you're going to get a home equity loan on it instead of refinancing the first, then you have no issues, because home equity lenders don't care, right? That you got we call them a HELOC, right? Acronym for home equity line of credit. So they don't really care that, hey, as long as you're living there, they'll give you a HELOC and you got it. And then if you decide to, you know, take that money and go buy another place, you know, then they're not going to come and go, wait a minute, hey, you know, you're not living there anymore. It's only when we do first mortgages just because of the first lien position and the rules, requirements, and all the tracking.
So if you got a HELOC, you wouldn't have to wait to go and, but would you need to, so in Vin's example, you bought it for 350, it's now worth 500. If you get a HELOC, are they going to give you money based on the 350 or the 500?
Well, remember 350, no, the 500, the value. Yeah.
Okay, so they take the current value of it.
And then
So-
you can just use that money for anything, like, or do you have to tell them what you want to use that money for? Or is it just like, it's just a loan?
Yeah,
to
I would not. Yeah, I mean, I would not say, hey, what's a HELOC for? I'm gonna go get a HELOC to go buy a new primary residence. I wouldn't say that. I would just say, hey, it's for home improvements and that type of deal. Yeah.
Going back to that example, what if I wanted to cash out? Is it every year you can only, or I don't know how many years, but like when you have to pay capital gains tax?
Yeah, but remember, when you do a loan, there are no capital gains because it's a loan.
But if you sold your property though,
Yes.
and then you use the money to buy a new property, like let's say you wanted to upgrade your primary house. So
yeah,
like for your first like home that you sell, you don't have to pay capital gains on that. But let's say if I did it again within the same year, or how do taxes work with that?
yeah. I mean, I'm not a CPA, so I would have to respectfully tell you to consult your CPA. But usually the rule is this: if you have a primary residence and you sell it with it between years 2 and 5, then you get a one-time exemption to sell without having to pay capital gains if you don't put that in a new property. But again, you need to talk to a CPA. You know?
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Larry, correct me if I'm wrong, beyond that, you've got the capital gains exemption, isn't it 250 grand?
Yeah, I think it changes for a single and then married couple.
And the married couple is 500 grand. So if you're not making more than that, you're exempt every time you do that, right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
only for sale. That's not on a refinance or anything like that.
Right, just on the sale. So I've got a question for you, because you've been talking about if you wanted to buy your first home and then move on to something better and use that as an investment property. What if I like the home that I'm in and that I own, but I have money to invest in another property? What are my options there? Is the best, like, am I just looking at an investment property at 15% down?
Well, no, so that's when I go back where you can go to 15, 20, or 25% down, with 25% down on an investment property being the sweet spot.
Uh-huh. Because what my next purchase would be, if I'm staying in my primary residence, it would be an investment property, right?
Correct. Yeah.
That's the only way to do that. Now, and the other direction, what if you've got a first-time home buyer who's never bought a house, doesn't own a property already? What is a smart way to, because I've talked with you about this before about, you buy a duplex and you rent one side of it and help pay your mortgage and then you move on. Like how would you coach somebody as the first-time home buyer in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, knowing what I know today, my first house in '93 would have been a duplex, in lieu of a single family residence. So you can actually buy a single family. So single family called a 1 unit, right? So a 1 to 4 unit property. If you occupy 1 unit, you can purchase that with as little as 3.5% down on an FHA loan, and then we get to use 75% of the gross rents from the other units to qualify. It's pretty crazy. And so here's how this works. And that's an FHA loan. So FHA loan limits are a little bit lower than conventional or conforming, but they're still real close. But as the number of units increase, so does that minimum loan amount. So I think the FHA conventional, up to 4 units. And it's county specific. So let's call it the Tri-County area or even Clark County for that matter. The 4 unit, you can get a loan up to, I think it's like almost, $1 million, 900 some thousand. I would not recommend that for a first time buyer.
Yeah.
Just because there's a lot. But a duplex is amazing, for a first time buyer. It's manageable. There's a couple schools of thought. So I used to self-manage, back when I had 12 units, I used to self-manage 12 units, and it's a lot of work. And I finally got smart and turned it over to a property management company for many reasons. And my recommendation is, if you're going to buy a duplex, my opinion is that, especially if you've never been a landlord before, which sounds like most won't be, I would actually have that managed by a property management company, and then basically not let them know that you own the duplex, right? Because obviously, if you can see what can happen is that, okay, great, I'm the owner of this duplex. Mark lives right next door, and guess what? Things aren't working. They're going to just browbeat you all the time, to get stuff fixed and all that. So I speak to that a lot about just keep it. Yes, you're going to pay a management company, but really what you're doing is you're subsidizing your portion of the mortgage, right? And this thing is continuing to appreciate in value, And so I'm just trying to keep everything, the homeowner out of harm's way, arm's length distance, for business, purposes, and that way you're not going to get nickel and dime, by a tenant that knows you're the owner, and or try to take advantage of you, because I've been there,
You're saying it's better to use a property management company and just pay that fee,
Yeah.
whatever they charge, like 20%.
No, it's not 20%, 10% of the annual or the monthly gross rents.
I guess I'm thinking of like short-term rentals, they charge more. So yeah, a long-term rental, they might
Yeah,
charge.
you can't do a short-term rental on a multi-family.
Yeah, okay.
Quick question. So you're saying, as a first time buyer getting a duplex, would that still be considered a primary residence, or is that now an investment property?
No, if you occupy 1 unit, it's a primary.
It is still primary. And so you still get that, you can still use it and do FHA. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And then what we do is, so pros and cons to FHA versus a conventional loan, even for this multifamily. The pros are you get in with very little down, right? Whereas if you wanted to do a conventional loan on, say, a 2 unit, then you have to, the minimum is 15% down. And that's only if you qualify for what we call a home possible loan. And that home possible loan, the way it works is that there are income restrictions, which means if you earn too much within the county that you're purchasing in, then you're ineligible for that program. Okay, so it's really hard to fit people in that box. But the advantage of, again, FHA, less down, really good interest rate. The monthly mortgage insurance is a little bit more expensive than conventional, because conventional requires 15% down if you fit within that box, but you're also putting more money down, right? The rate's a little bit higher than FHA. The mortgage insurance is cheaper, again, because it's a lower loan to value. But at some point, you can actually have the mortgage insurance on that conventional loan, or eventually you'll have the right to remove it after a certain period of time without doing anything, Whereas on FHA, the only way you can remove that mortgage insurance is if you refinance out of it. Okay.
Are you saying FHA will always have mortgage insurance?
Yeah. Regardless of how much you put down, it always has mortgage insurance.
Oh, I didn't know that. So you're saying you refinance out to a conventional loan eventually?
Correct.
To get mortgage insurance.
But this is what's important. This is why this is part of the program, the plan. We need to make sure that you do that refinance before you vacate the property, right? Because if I bought a 2 unit, 3 unit, 4, whatever, today, in a year from now, I just said, oh crud, I'm going to go buy the next house, and I already moved out and rented my unit that I was in. Now that's an investment property, and now for us to refinance is 80% of the appraised value. Actually, it's 75%. Right? So now we have to wait longer to get more equity in order to refinance out of it. But if you do it while you're in the unit, right, then we can refinance up to 80%, possibly 85% under conventional.
So timing's pretty important.
Timing's critical on that. Whereas again, if you can purchase that as a conventional loan, again with 15% down, if you fit within that box, right, then that's ideal, because then you can go ahead and just, after the year or so, you can move out and just wait till you hit the trigger points to remove that mortgage insurance. Not many people purchase. The majority of owner-occupied multi-unit 2 to 4 unit are FHA. It's just what it is, right? But with where these rents are, it's still pencils, even with the mortgage insurance.
Yeah, and how does that like compare if like the mortgage insurance is higher with FHA, but you have a lower rate? So does it kind of just like
it's a little bit of an offset, for sure, But your MI is going to be a lot. So we call MI. Your MI is way cheaper, 15% down on a conventional.
Okay.
But that's why we just look at we look at the numbers, right? We'll look at the numbers and go, hey, this duplex is 550, 575. The other units, it's 2 bed, 1 bath, both of them. The other unit's paying $1,200 a month, right? So here's your, after 3.5% down, here's your rate, here's your payment. We just run it all and go, okay, here's your, this is the portion that you're gonna have to cover the mortgage,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
But that's I love that approach, right? Being able to get that multifamily as property number one,
Well, because then you can just take that and go back to the original plan of you live in there and have the other person subsidize your rent, and eventually you're going to move on to a better residence, and you're then renting out both sides. And
right. Yep.
Sounds like the way to go.
Yep.
Cool. Any other questions,
Well,
guys?
anything else?
That was a lot of really good information, Larry. Elise is texting me on the side, asking if he has a certain chunk of money. What do you
No, you already asked it. I
That's
just
what I
like
did.
confirming. Yeah.
Well, hey, Elise, how's it going?
Good. Good. No, it's been answered, but
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you, Larry.
Yeah, I learned a lot. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
I got one more question.
Yeah, feel free to reach out, and yeah, definitely a resource for you guys.
Who had a question? Was that you, Vin?
Yeah. I'm curious what you think the market's gonna do, if you think there's gonna be another recession.
Yeah, I do not believe there's another recession. I don't believe there's a housing bubble. The reason why we had it before is because lending, right? And I was in it, right? We had all these programs that made it too easy to purchase houses or get a loan. So we basically commoditized lending. And I'll tell you, it's kind of crazy stuff. There was a time where you could purchase an investment property with 0 down, and where we didn't have to verify your income, and your credit score just had to be over 620. And I saw that, and I'm like, whoa, this is getting really loose, and this is not going to last long. And so therein lies the reason why. Lending home, to purchase homes or do loans is too easy, and the pieces weren't put in place, to really protect the lender, and I can just tell you story after story. If I didn't do that loan, I had realtors going, hey, they want to buy this house, whatever. I'm like, well, shoot, they don't make any money. He's like, yeah, but can't you do this one program? I'm like, well, let me find out. But if I didn't do that deal, there were 30 other lenders that would do it, So that's all changed. So now, because of the recession, the housing bubble, all that, in 2008, there's an act that came out, or bill, Dodd-Frank bill, that changed the whole landscape of lending. So now everything is under the microscope, and now the pendulum has swung way too far, in my opinion, to where lending is too tight. It's just crazy, the stuff we have to go through, especially. And then when COVID hit, we had all these additional steps, and Terry's heard me, talk about this a lot on, other presentations, but so because of that, loans are performing at a rate they've never performed ever, right? So delinquencies, default are, again, the lowest since they've been tracking this thing, the last probably 18 to 22 years, right? So that part's good. We kind of mentioned that we thought that housing market was going to get, hit by this COVID. But it never did. And what we learned is that even though we had, because I thought it was double-digit employment, I'm like, gosh, this is more than what we saw in the recession. I mean, something's got to give here. Well, what we learned is that the segment that actually was the majority of that unemployment was the service sector, hospitality, restaurants, service industry, because they closed, health, gyms and all that stuff. And a lot of those, I don't want to categorize them, but statistically speaking, they weren't really, looking to get a home loan, right? So, but then because on the other side, you had all these other, companies that were up to speed. I don't want to say the tech industry crushed it during COVID. We know that they still are. But companies that were high on technology, where they could pivot and go to the work from home and still, our company's one of them. It's like, I'm used to having 30 people in this office with, 8 processors, and well, we let them all work from home, and they outperformed, working from home than what they did here, right? Now, granted, we're dealing with a lot higher volume, so that's probably part of it, but they've learned how to become very efficient. So if there was anything that's going to derail the housing market, it would have been COVID, and it didn't do it. And so now, remember, before COVID in 2019, our economy was in a great trajectory. It was a well-balanced market. Housing was in great shape. Still a little bit, more teetering on the side of the seller's market, but nothing like it is today. But now, again, every year that goes by, there are more buyers in the market, and we just don't have enough inventory. So we're not going to see market values go down. It just, do I feel like this market is overheated? For sure. But, now what we're going to start seeing is, do I think rates need to go up? I believe so. I think rates are too low. We need to kind of, this, and Fed just came out today. We saw a little bump in rates today. The Fed came out today and said that you hate to hear this word, the word taper, because they've been buying mortgage-backed securities. That's what's been keeping these rates low. So when they use that word taper, that means they're going to taper the number of mortgage-backed securities. So that means they're going to purchase less. Rates have to go up. And so, they're just trying to find this because they're trying to combat, the cost of lumber, the cost of goods, all this stuff is very expensive. So I believe rates need to go up, but I'm going to tell you, it's still not going to slow down this crazy market. So instead of, when Terry goes and lists a property, instead of her getting 11 offers on it, she might get 4, right? But at least that's a little more manageable than the 11, I'm saying this not to be a naysayer, but it's brutal on buyers. Terry and I work with a lot of buyers. It's tough. We emotionally get attached, and it's like, crud, I say it takes a village to close a home loan. It takes a village just to get the dang thing in contract, but you can still look at the fundamentals. There's nothing that says that we're going to go backwards on this, and it's kind of scary. And I think, the other piece is there's too many people on the planet, realistic, there just really is. Our resources are being tapped and stressed and all that, but that's why I get so passionate. Got to get that first house. If you get that first house, right? What, right, Elise? Get that first house.
Then you're in, and then you can rise with the market.
It's great.
Exactly.
I don't think it makes it any easier when you're spending $500,000 on a 2-bedroom, 1 bath.
It's crazy, man.
Yeah, and if you look at the West Coast, right, we're still the cheapest. If you look at the Northwest, we're still the cheapest. So I thought, like, the protesters and all that stuff, the vandalism in Portland. Again, I'm a native of Portland. It pains me to see that. So I'm thinking, hey, there's an opportunity out there, to buy. But we still have a lot of people moving to this area despite all that. It would be nice to have some kind of something to give us a little bit of to kind of pump the brakes to slow down.
Yeah.
Remember, we haven't even hit our peak season yet. We're just now coming in our peak season.
Yeah. I know it'll be really interesting to see if that actually means anything, because it feels like it's just been going full blown for the last 12 months.
Yeah. But despite all that, you guys, it just, if you know that you're like ready to make that next step to that, to purchase, you just got to, get pre-approved, make sure you're all on the same page, and just, have an open mind. And look, we all can't live in Irvington, we all can't live in the cool Woodstock neighborhood. We get that, right? But if you're willing to sit there and, if you want to buy a condo, I'll talk to you about pros and cons of condos. Terry's already heard my spiel on that. But if that's what it takes to get an entry level, then that's what it takes. But, you know, if it requires you to go a little bit further out, not a bad scenario too. You know, I mean, so there's ways that we can kind of at least find a little bit of some kind of happy medium, you know, based on, you know, trying to stay in the frenzy and the fray of what we're seeing, you know, in certain, you know, parts of this market. You know?
I have, now that we're all talking, I have a couple questions that are unrelated to that. Is that okay?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I currently live in California. I am moving to the Portland area, which you guys are all like, stop moving, but I'm coming for you.
We love California.
Yeah. So obviously I'll be getting a new job and everything up there. Are the loans, I know obviously they look at employment history. Is there differences in the loans in what they're requiring for employment history, what they're looking at, what's more likely to get you approved and things? I'm just kind of wondering how soon can I get into this position?
Yeah, so great question. So if you're relocating to a different city, the first thing we look at is, okay, the employment that you're currently at, are you going to remain at the same employer?
Mm-hmm.
So is that a yes or no for you?
Well, no, because I work in California, so I'm quitting this job.
Yeah, so you're going to get a new job and
Yes.
got it. Okay. So then, yeah, so in order to qualify for the loan, then we need to use the new job, right, as the qualifying employment. And so,
Right.
yeah, before we can actually issue like a free approval or anything, we just need to know, okay, great. Where's your new job? Okay, great. Let's see your offer letter. What's your start date? Here's your compensation. We plug all that in, and then we can work from that. But what we can't do is use the current job saying, okay, hey, I'm going to move to Portland because if the current job is not
Right. Okay, so there's not like a requirement, like you have to have been at this job for a year in order for us. Okay. My next question, you mentioned this earlier, but for some reason, there was background noise and I couldn't hear. You mentioned something about credit scores, and I missed it. You were talking about one of these loans and like how the rates are different, obviously with the, do you remember what you were talking about?
Yeah. So borrowers are really good, you know, really good credit scores, you know, so I would say 720 plus, right? Well, you know, the conventional loan is the best program for you. Okay. I mean, 700 could be fine, 680 could be fine, but it depends on the scenario. But you start getting lower than that 680, you know, mid 600, FHA is really going to be the best program because the rate's going to be much lower, even with the mortgage insurance versus if we went conventional.
And sorry, I have one more. With the buying as a second home, you said that second homes are great because you put less down, the rates are lower, but you said it's harder to refinance for cash. Can you explain that one more time? Why?
Yeah. So if you already have a second home, and then if you rented it, but let's say you rented it for 365 days of the year, and now you want to refinance it, and you reflect that on your tax return, we can't refinance it in the second home by virtue of you renting it for the whole year. So that now becomes an investment.
Okay. Okay. So as long as you don't refinance it, it can stay as a second home.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And really, it's the only time that becomes an issue if you're going to refinance, right? But you know, you really should be refinancing now because we're not going to see those rates this low ever again, right?
Okay.
Say that, but you know, just like I said in February 2020, you know, this is my 20th year, and I think I've seen everything. And then COVID hits. I'll never say that again. But you know, but yeah, so that's where that would come up to play, Gabrielle. You know, with the if you had to refinance it, right? But if you rented it for 80 days, right, and you had equity, and you know, and there was a reason to refinance, right, then you're fine. You can do it as a second home. But on that note, for you, right, so kind of what my previous client, you know, if you're like, look, I've got a really good job here, right, and I have not put in my notice, I haven't done anything, but I really want to buy a property in the Portland area, right? So we can actually do that as a second home now using your current employer. But again, we're going to qualify in your current rent that you pay, if you pay rent. And also we're going to have to qualify in the new proposed house payment on the new house and other debt obligations.
Okay.
So that's what this guy did. I mean, so he knew that when he was coming up here, he was not going to have his job. So he didn't want to wait. I go, well, let's do the second home. That's what we did. And then we got here. He ended up, he's in tech, so we knew he was going to get a good job, but he just didn't want to wait.
Okay, so can you turn a second home into a primary? So I could, in theory, do that where I bought a home in Portland as a second home, and then once I got there, turn it to a primary.
Yeah. So you can buy the second home because you want to use your current employer
Mhm.
to qualify. No scrutiny on that or nothing. You buy the house, go ahead and put a tenant in the thing later, right? Until you decide to move up and live in it. That's exactly what he did.
Okay.
He did his short-term rental, which is a whole nother option. If you guys want to know about that, I can speak to that too. But yeah, but he lives in the house now. Actually, I take that back. He moved in the house, and then and he lived there for probably about 6 months, and then we just got him in his new primary about 3 months ago. So
Can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
So I might ping on what Vin said earlier, and he was talking about having a primary residence that you live in. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, right now, and then buying a second home to maybe upgrade to, and leaving your primary residence that you're in now. This is something I've actually been mulling over with my place I have now for a couple of years.
Yeah.
So I've been in this place since 2008, which sounds like a bad year to buy to me in the first place, but that's quite a long time. Since then, it's built up a lot of equity.
Yeah.
So what do you think the best way would be to get out of the primary residence I'm in now and upgrade as the family gets bigger?
Yeah.
And then eventually rent this place?
Yeah. So
What you were saying, I think Vin said something similar to that earlier.
yeah. So no, exactly. So first thing I look at is do you need to get any equity out of the current house to purchase the new one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you do, then we need to look at refinancing, right?
Right.
And then we would want to do that sooner than later, right? Again, to give us that nice,
The cushion.
scrutiny on timing, right? And then yeah, then when you go in to go purchase the new house, and obviously we're going to have a structure based on your goals and objectives, payment, budget, location, I mean all that stuff.
So refi over HELOC.
Yes. So let's talk about the HELOC. So the HELOC is really designed for short-term needs. It's not really designed for long-term. So HELOCs, they start at prime, which is 3.25, and then based on loan to value and credit score, there's going to be a margin added to it. Okay, and most go to 80% of the appraised value. Okay, so they serve a really nice purpose. But what I don't like is when clients are going to take that, do a HELOC to get cash, and then go buy another primary. Now they vacated the house that the HELOC's on, and then all of a sudden now we have a scenario where you've got two loans on it, because the issue with HELOCs is the rate is not fixed.
Yeah.
Whereas first mortgages, 30-year fixed. HELOCs are not. And the reason being is because they will change whenever the Fed changes the prime rate. And make no mistake, it's inevitable. That prime rate will go up, has to go up, right? And so you just don't want to be in a scenario where you're exposed to a variable rate loan.
Yeah.
And you can't go and then if you refinance it, once you've left, now we're dealing with an investment property cash out refinance, which just, it keeps adding to the rate, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I'm a fan of, if you have the equity, even if you're at like 2.5% today on your current mortgage, which most people aren't, if you're at 2.5, but look, you're going to refinance and say, hey, I'm going to take out 100 grand with a plan to eventually parlay that into a new primary 6 months later or so. Even if that rate today is 3%, it still makes sense because there's an ROI with the cash you're getting out to go put in another property, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So would we rather have one appreciating asset or two or three or four, right? And watch, I mean, Mark, you're a great example. You bought the thing in 08. I mean, you know what the thing's worth today, right?
I do.
And you've seen that's so that net equity is to your net worth, right? When you don't have a house, what else is building this net worth? Hey, we got our 401k. Okay, cool. We got this, we got that, but we don't. But real estate is year after year after year, right?
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Larry, you're saying a HELOC is not a fixed rate. How often does that rate change? like
Just
yearly?
whenever the Fed announces it.
It just goes with the Fed.
Yeah, so the Fed meets quarterly and then they'll announce what they're doing.
So that's why that's
It
usually
gets all kind of crazy and everything announce it.
right. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. They serve a purpose. They really do. I like my clients, once we what I call perfected the first mortgage. So for example, we've been doing a lot of refinances because these rates plummeted, right? So, and a lot of people had HELOCs. Well, they've got to, so the kind of like the standard, what we've seen is that people that purchased homes, say in the last few years, their rate on the first mortgage might have been 3.6, 3.7, but the HELOC was probably 5.5. So then we're going to come in and combine those two, wipe them out, put them at a rate, cash out rates are a little higher, but let's just say, I can tell you before February, cash out refinances were still around 2.8%, they're just a little higher today, but it still makes so much sense, financial sense. And then we talk about, should you get extra cash for improvements or, kids going to college, or now's the time to do it because we're not going to see, rates this low, right? So we're just kind of providing a solution to all this, but so that's what I call perfecting the first mortgage, because once you perfect it, we're not going to mess with that again, right?
Yeah.
And then if you want to get a new HELOC for a rainy day, I'm all for that, right? I think it's important, right? Especially if you're self-employed, I think, you should have a HELOC, but I always caution, don't abuse it, right? It's one of those scenarios where you need to use it so like I have a HELOC, but I use that, in the event that I need to renovate one of my, units or whatnot, so that's what I use it for. Some of my buddies have them to go buy other properties, right? So they'll buy other properties, depending upon the scenario. A lot of them are investment, properties, and a lot of them they're not really flipping them, but they're just buying, renovating, and then they'll have me come back in once the home is done. It's worth more. We'll refinance, cash out, give them back try to replenish, whatever down they put, and then they'll go ahead and pay the HELOC.
Interesting.
One thing I want to mention, so normal residential financing, I provide, Bank of America, Director, all that, right? This money is not used for people to flip properties. So just in case anybody on this call was, thinking of that.
What do you mean?
Yeah, so you can't go buy a property, fix it up and sell it like 4, 5, 6 months later.
Again, timeline.
Yeah.
Of how long you need to be there. Yeah.
If you're gonna buy it, it's gonna take a year to renovate, and that's fine. We can work that out, but yeah.
Can you buy it and flip it as an investment property, or you can't do that either?
So you're gonna buy, yeah. So when I say flip, I mean you're gonna buy and sell.
Yeah. So you flip it, but it's like, so if I guess we would just buy it as a secondary home, because that would be too much. It would be too much of an interest rate to buy it as an investment rate. So you would do it as a secondary home and then just take your time with it.
Yeah, correct. So really the intent would be to buy a property and sell it right away. But if you're gonna buy it and keep it, right, then you're fine. Yeah, and then like Stephanie, maybe to your question, I mean, we would decide, is this a second home scenario or investment? Because here's the deal. So, and I didn't mention this. So my house is in Tigard, so I can't go buy another house in Tigard or Portland, right? Or can be and call it a second home. It's too close in proximity to my primary residence. So second homes have to be, if you read the guidelines, it states a minimum 150 miles from the primary residence and or in a vacation destination area. That's why the Oregon coast is, that's not 150 miles, but it's.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, Hood River, it's not 150 miles, but people are thinking about there.
Is that
the one I'm still trying to get okayed as a second home, which is really not up to me, but it's this wine country. So I have a lot of clients that are, they're like, hey, we want to get a second home down. I'm like, Newburgh won't work, but if you get a little further out, maybe like Lafayette or, McMinnville, we might be able to get that done. And the reason why clients are looking at that is because of the short-term rental aspect.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Man, so much good information, Larry. I also it's so much information. it's almost like the next step is come to Larry with your specific situation and have him figure it out for you, because there's so many different ways this could go.
Yeah, that's what I do. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts where,
Yeah.
everybody's scenario, and it's just, okay,
Yeah.
Based on your goals and objectives and what you want to accomplish, this is how we can get there.
Totally.
I would like your contact info.
I'll share it with everybody.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah,
Any
all this
other questions for Larry? We've covered it all. Awesome.
Appreciate it.
Larry, thank you so much. You've been fantastic. I learned a bunch.
And again, just so get my contact Terry, and then you guys can just reach out to me directly. We can get on a call or whatever too. So
I recorded all of this, so I'll send out a recording and Larry's contact information to everyone who was on the call, and then the handful of other people who weren't able to make it. So I'll shoot that out to everybody.
Thank you, Terry. Thanks.
Terry.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Great guys.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Terry.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good one.